Welcome to Under the Radar, a show about independent iOS app development. I'm Marco Arment.
And I'm David Smith. Under the Radar is never longer than 30 minutes, so let's get started.
So Apple launched their search ads program last fall in the App Store, and a lot of developers, I think us included, didn't really know what to make of it at first. It certainly was a little bit intimidating, a little bit off-putting, the idea that we'd have to pay to have our ads shown at the top of search results in the App Store. And we've now had a lot of time. I've actually been using search ads for Overcast since the day they launched, and I'm still using them today. It's a little bit back in the news now because yesterday Apple launched, I think by surprise for most of us, Apple launched a new Search Ads Basic, which is a version of search ads that is so far US only, but they said it's going to expand to the rest of the world. And that's where the ads show up, not who can buy them. So if you're a developer outside the U.S., you can buy these ads, but they will only start showing in the U.S. App Store at first. But anyway, so now they have Search Ads Basic, and the old one is renamed Search Ads Advanced. I think it's worth discussing now that we have, at least from my perspective and from yours, David, to the extent that you've used it. Now that we have I have over a year now of search ad data. It has slowly expanded from initially the main offering was also US only, and then it expanded over the last maybe 6 months or so to a few other different marketplaces. Now you can have Canada, UK, Australia, Switzerland, and New Zealand. And it's a little bit cumbersome to manage them all, honestly, but I think I've come up with a number of key insights and best practices that might be useful to share. What's your experience with them? Because you have way more apps than I do, because all I can say is what my experience has been with my single app, and it's a free app, so it's going to be different than paid upfront apps, and it's fairly popular among certain people, so that's going to be different from an app that's totally unknown. Have you had more diverse experience than I have with this?
A little bit. So I've tried a variety of different campaigns and things with this. I've tried it for my paid apps, for my free apps. And overall, my experience is in aggregate is just very mixed, I would say. Some of the time it seems to work and pay off. Sometimes it really doesn't. And the thing that I struggle with the most with these is trying to, it's there's initially the obvious naive reaction to something like advertising is viewing it as in a weird way, almost like a direct investment where I take this amount of money, I put it into this, and then I expect to get a certain amount, hopefully a greater amount back. And that was straightforward, especially for my paid apps, for example, where it's very straightforward that search ads are based on the cost per install. And if it's a paid app, my revenue per install is, is whatever, 70% of whatever the purchase price is. And I could go in and say I'm essentially willing to break even, say, for all of these app installs. And I tried that for a little bit, but in general, that didn't seem to work at a very high volume anyway. Where I would put, it's I would get some amount of install and traffic, but it didn't seem like I was paying enough for those installs that my ads are being shown very often. Either that or my terms are very low volume or whatever. But it didn't seem like it was one of these things that's great, I can spend $1 and get $1.40 back, but I can only have 3 or 4 transactions a day that are doing that. And so it's that's net positive, but not particularly interesting. So I had that experience on the paid side. And then on the free side, because it's so hard to sort of have this feeling of what an install is worth. And I pursued it a little bit, but at the end, it kind of felt like I was just sort of throwing money away, or at least putting money into something that was so hard for me to quantify, that over time I just sort of backed away from it and decided that it's okay. And, I'm probably helped a little bit in this that my most important apps tend to have reasonably good, just general search, optimization or whatever. They show up fairly high anyway. And so that helps a lot for not needing this necessarily, because it's, I'm now the second, say if I was previously the top result for a search, now with ads, I'm the second result, because the first one, the paid result is going to always be on top. But, at least being on that first screen, is probably useful enough, but yeah, I don't know. I go back and forth on how useful they are, and then in the back of my mind, I kind of feel like I'm probably missing this. It's just in some ways like the fundamental like realities of advertising, where I'm sure if you were just like a typical bit like a large brand advertiser, like your goal is not necessarily like direct net positive cash flow from each advertising buy. It's a much more broad something that you're just, you're taking it's like you have a marketing budget whose purpose is to just increase brand awareness and to increase usage of the app as this kind of more general concept. In some ways, even kind of like per our conversation a couple episodes ago where I was talking about why I'm making Workouts++ free, where it's like there's this general value to being well known, beyond the immediate, like, sort of return on that investment that you see within a few days. And so I go back and forth if I'm just like doing it wrong, or not, but I don't know. My experience has been kind of mixed, and mostly I've kind of backed away with it. I'm going to try the new basics approach, like just to see if there's anything interesting there. And I mean, Apple's giving us $100 free credit, so like, great, sure, I'll take that $100 and spend it. But overall, I'm still kind of mixed about it.
I think, a lot of developers didn't give it a fair shot when it first launched because we felt kind of put off by it, or kind of like, like it was a trick or a negative thing for Apple to be doing. I think we have there's kind of two parts of that argument that are worth, I think, internalizing now. Number one is that, well, it's done. It's clearly here to stay. They are not only keeping it but expanding it. So I think that ship has sailed. Much like initially when we were all mad that App Review was a thing when the App Store first launched, that ship has sailed, and so has this one. So you might as well get on board with at least being okay with it existing. Even if you decide not to participate in it, you should at least realize that this is now a factor in the App Store that's probably here to stay.
Yeah.
And number two, while it does feel pretty bad to pay to reach people who were already seeking you out, so like if somebody searches the App Store for Overcast, someone else's ad is going to be up top there if they outbid me on that keyword that day. Probably Audible, but someone else's ad is going to be up there, and it's probably going to be a bigger company than me, and I'm going to feel kind of like that's a little bit unfair. But the reality is that could also be a smaller company than me. That could also be an indie startup who wants to get into the same market I'm in and wants to have a chance at paying to take away some of those searches from me. And I'm doing the same thing. I'm bidding on generic terms like podcast, but I'm also bidding on terms like Audible because I'm trying to get some of that same audience. And search ads largely have worked for me, and so it is the kind of thing where you can still promote an app for free through traditional PR channels and marketing channels, and you probably should. But this, in a way, gives an opportunity for small apps to get seen in some way and get started. And yes, of course, it does take money, and therefore that will price out a lot of developers. But if you manage it responsibly and conservatively up front, it doesn't have to take that much money. And if you luck out with your terms and if you control it well enough, you can actually make it profitable per user. So this leads into, I think, the first major challenge of using search ads, which is you have to know what a user is worth to you. And that's very hard to do if your app is not paid up front. If there's any more complex business model than paid up front. And honestly, I don't think paid up front apps work that well in search ads because you don't pay per install. You pay per tap on the ad. So the cost per install varies depending on how many people tap your ad and then decide not to buy it or not to download it. And so that can obviously vary based on things like your screenshot, your description, your ratings. But also, I think if you have a price there, an upfront price, I would guess that causes much lower buy-through rates or conversion rates from the tap to the purchase than a free app would. And so that's going to dramatically affect your cost right there. So if you're paid up front, I think it's easier to calculate what an install is worth to you, but it's also harder to get those installs. So I'm going to now focus for the rest of my discussion of this on the free versions, on free apps up front, because that's what I know. That's what I have. And I think that's going to be mostly what search ads are good for, because there's just that one less big barrier to entry for people who are learning about it for the first time through that ad to then click there and download it. So the question then becomes, how do you value a user if your app is free up front? So if you have a scheme like I do, which I think at least part of this is common, if not the whole thing, where I have ads in the app and I get paid for those ads, and I have an in-app purchase that can be optionally bought to remove the ads and add some premium stuff, but mostly it's removing the ads. And I think this is common enough that I can tell you some lessons I've learned from this. Number one, when you're trying to figure out what each user is worth to you, you have to make some assumptions that might be uncomfortable or cruel or revealing. For instance, what percentage of people who download your app will actually ever launch it? Like, that's a big, it's not 100%. Newsflash, if you weren't aware of this yet, and if you already have some analytics in your app, you probably already know this kind of thing. But yeah, it's not 100%. That might, you might get 2/3 or 80% or something like that. Like it might, or half. It might not be a very kind ratio of people who actually ever launch the app after downloading it. And then after that, you have to then work through, if you're valuing a user based on the likelihood that they're going to buy an in-app purchase, or whether they're going to see your ads or follow through on any other kind of monetization, what other barriers are there between getting the app and running the app and getting to that point where they're making you money? Do they have to create an account? Do they have to sign in? Do they have to, enter some data? And all of those steps are going to reduce that percentage even further of how many of those downloaders actually make it to the part of the app that makes you money. Not to mention the fact that once they get, assuming they're actually using it, then you have the question of what percentage of actual users will then buy the in-app purchase. Or if it's ad-based, what percentage of them will see the ads? And then ads have another massive complex guess that you have to make or data you have to collect, which is, how long will each person be using my app? Will the average user use it for a day, a year, 10 years? So those numbers can dramatically change what you think a user is worth. And I would urge you that if you don't know this number, if you are making estimates and guesses on a lot of these numbers, which you might have to, if you don't have really good, really creepy analytics, like I don't, you have to guess on a lot of these numbers or just wait and see the results. And for me, I found that guess very conservatively on these numbers. Like, every step of the way that might reduce the amount of users that get to the next stage, just cut it in half. Really, be very aggressive. Just assume half of the downloads will result in launches. Assume that half of the launches will result in accounts being created, or signups happening, or proceeding to the next step. And so these numbers start to divide out, and math starts catching up to you pretty soon. And so you have to be very, very careful when making any kind of assumption about what a user is worth to you long term. And keep in mind that long term might really be a day for the majority of your users. Your average duration of how long a user sticks with your app might be a day or a week or something pretty short. So you can't, for instance, assume that you have 6 months or a year of ad revenue to attribute to that download, because you probably don't.
The nice thing, though, is we do get a lot of those numbers now from App Analytics and iTunes Connect.
That's true, yeah.
At least we do have a better starting place than, you don't necessarily need the creepy analytics for a lot of that kind of stuff. Because I'm just thinking, with the things that we get from there are, we get a retention percent, which is a really useful measure for being able to get a sense of, so once someone has downloaded the app, what is the what percentage of those people will open it the next day? And what percent will open it a week later, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later? I think they go up to 28 days. And so at that point, you get a sense of what your retention curve looks like there. And so at least you can kind of, infer that, if your retention has kind of flattened out by the time you're a month out, you've probably gotten that user. If you're still, whatever it is, say you have 10% retention after a month, it's you probably have them for there. But even if you just capped it at a month and tried to work out, how many sessions will the user have, if 10% of them are there at the end of a month, and maybe 20% of them are there after a week. You can kind of do a little bit of math, but yeah, it is a really tricky thing. And I think being conservative here is by far the better way to err on, because it's far more important for it to just be a reasonable number than it is for it to be an exact number.
Exactly. And all this, by the way, this is all making a pretty big assumption, all this advice so far, that you don't want to lose money on each installation. But there are types of businesses and apps and situations where that might not be the case. You might actually want to lose money on, or rather, you might be willing to lose money on every installation if maybe it's only a little bit of money, or if you have a plan to make it up down the road, or if you really want to just focus on growth of your user base right now, or if you haven't monetized yet. If you're like a startup that's pre-monetization strategy and you just want growth, so you might have reasons where you don't care about whether you're going to make it up properly, on the other side or not. Or you just might be betting for your future and betting, what, I can take a small loss on each user right now, but some percentage of these users will tell their friends and spread the app and cause my organic installations to go up. So it's very, very vague and based on a lot of estimates and assumptions. This is true of all advertising, on all sides for everything. So all this is to say, try to quantify some of these numbers, try to make good estimates, try to have as much data as you can to make good decisions here. But your decisions might not have the same, needs as someone else's. Anyway, before I get into specifics of what I do in the App Store with App Search Ads, we are brought to you this week by Eero. This is another kind of ad. By Eero. Never think about Wi-Fi again. Eero has created the dream Wi-Fi setup. A fast, reliable connection throughout your house and even into the backyard if you want. And now is the best time to get on board with Eero, as they've just released their new super slick second-generation devices. This brand new tri-band second-generation model, along with the new Eero Beacon, allows you to build a Wi-Fi system that is perfectly tailored to your home. The new second-generation Eero includes a third 5 GHz radio, making it twice as fast as before. This lets you do more than ever, whether it's your Wi-Fi needs. Eero has the power to blanket your entire home in fast, reliable Wi-Fi. The base unit sits flat on any surface. Just plug it into the wall with the included power adapter, and you're ready to connect to your Eero either with Ethernet or wirelessly. And the new Eero also includes a Thread radio, which lets you connect to low-power devices such as locks, doorbells, and more. And the new little satellite units are now called Eero Beacons, and this is new as well. All you do is plug it into a wall. It looks like kind of like a large nightlight almost. It sits flush right on the outlet, right against the wall. There's no wire needed. Plugs right in, and it even includes a nightlight on the bottom to help you out. So you can plug it in anywhere you have an outlet. You don't need like a table or a surface or a cabinet to hide it in. These are wonderful. I love these new beacons. And the new Eero app lets you manage your network from the palm of your hand. And you can also easily create and share a guest network too if you want that. And if you need any help, Eero's customer support is amazing. You can call them and get a Wi-Fi expert on the phone in just 30 seconds. I've used Eero, and it is by far, I've used other multi-point access point things before. And first of all, you definitely want multi-point Wi-Fi, but Eero is by far the easiest and fastest to set up I've ever seen. It's wonderful. And the fact that you don't have to run wires between the base stations is also just incredible. So definitely recommend it. It's very, very easy to use and performs very well. So the new Eero starts at just $399 for one second-generation Eero base station and 2 beacons, and that is everything you will need for almost any situation. You can add more if you want, but you probably won't need to. Listeners of this show can get free overnight shipping to the US or Canada when you head to Eero.com, that's EERO.com, and use promo code RADAR. That's Eero.com, promo code RADAR for free overnight shipping. Thank you to Eero for supporting this show. So I wanted to get into a little bit more specifics of how to optimize search ads on the App Store. Now that you know roughly what you want to spend per installation, because you figured that out during my ad read, I guess. I don't know. You figured it out sometimes. We'll assume you have that number.
You did the math.
Yeah. Roughly what you're able to spend per installation. It's worth now learning kind of how the system works. So the main thing with search ads is that it's dependent very, very heavily on Apple's own App Store relevancy engine. And as we know from App Store search, it's not that good. It's it works on a fairly coarse level, but there's a lot of mismatches, a lot of misjudgment of relevancy. Ranking isn't so great, and this applies therefore to the search ads matching algorithm as well. So you need to do some tailoring, and you need to know that going into it that the relevancy matching is not very strong, and this, therefore this could work for or against you. If, your app might rank weirdly high or weirdly low. One thing Apple has done, which I think is a smart move, is, and Phil announced this on stage when they announced search ads or whenever that was, but the idea is that even if you bid a high enough price, if Apple's algorithm deems your app not relevant to a query, it will not include it, no matter what you bid. And this is good because this prevents something like Clash of Clans bidding on the term podcast because it could be becoming a high volume term and they want to get in on that, even though their app is not relevant to podcast at all. That's actually a very good prohibition. The downside of that is that if the search algorithm guesses wrong on whether your app is relevant, you could be on the wrong side of that. So something to keep in mind. There's not much you can do about that, unfortunately. But that is nice to know that that's a thing. When you are picking your keywords, I have found that it's best to mostly just do search match. That if you do too much keyword selection, you can get weird results. If you do search match, you're kind of letting Apple do it for you. And this is actually, so when they launched yesterday, they launched Search Ads Basic. That's all it is, as far as I can tell. It seems like it is a search match only ad account. Is that right?
Yep, you just give it a budget and a maximum cost per install. Like those are the only two numbers you put in, and then it just does the rest. It'll try and find you whatever the best opportunities are, and sort of do its own thing. But you have no visibility into what those terms are or anything like that. It's just you just give it. Basically, you just tell it how much money overall are you going to give to this campaign, and then what's the maximum amount that you're willing to pay for an install, and then it just does the rest for you.
The only thing about that I will say that, and this is why I'm a little bit worried about Search Ads Basic, is that one of the great things about the Search Ads implementation in the advanced mode, that used to be the only mode until yesterday, is that you can go in, so run it for like a few weeks, with, or whatever time you want, run it for a little while. And then you can go in to the reporting areas, and you can see if you go within the ad group, you go to a tab called Search Terms, and it will list the terms that people actually use to search your app, and you can rank that by things like conversion rate or average cost per installation, which it's CPA, cost per action in the advertising world, but it's cost per installation. And so you can sort and rank the keywords people are actually using that Apple is matching to you, for you. And you can see, certain ones are going to be better than others in terms of what you're actually spending for those users, what percentage of them are actually installing your app, etc. And if you see the keywords, I'll tell you, some of mine, I start out. So if I sort by spend, which is the amount of money you have spent on it for that time interval, my first one is podcast, which is good. That is my most expensive one, but that's also my highest volume one, and I'm bidding high on that because I want to get those people who are searching for podcast. Then there's low volume terms, which is kind of their bucket for everything else that's too small to matter. Then I have things like podcast app for iPhone. Great, that's what I want. The next one down is FM transmitter. Well, I'm not sure I want that one. That's not that relevant. And sure enough, FM transmitter has a way lower conversion rate than the other ones. So I have to decide, is this actually... do I actually want to be paying for people who search for FM transmitter? And if you don't, one thing you can do in Search Ads Advanced is you can go through this list. You can check off whichever ones you don't think are worth bidding on, that are not relevant enough. And you can say add as negative keywords. And if you say exact match, then, which you probably should do, then it will not put you on those bids. And that, I have found, is a necessary part. If you're going to do search match, if you're not going to just bid on exact keywords, if you're going to do any search matching at all on the App Store, you must go in and add as negative keywords the things that are not relevant to your app, that are costing you a lot of money. And because Apple's relevancy engine isn't that great, you get a lot of these. And some of them you actually might want. So, one of the very common ones that I get is things like music player without Wi-Fi, free music downloader, offline music player, FM radio offline. And I'm like, well, actually, those are people who want to listen to stuff offline, some of which is radio. So I think I actually might want to keep bidding on a lot of those. Whereas one of them, Overwatch, I don't want to bid on, because that's a video game that has nothing to do with my app, and it's being matched by some kind of linguistic coincidence. And I definitely don't want to bid on Overwatch terms, so I definitely add that as a negative keyword. But again, keep in mind that you're dealing with a fairly low sophistication search algorithm and relevancy algorithm. So be careful. One of the reasons I said only add negative keywords as exact match is that earlier in the summer I had a problem where I had added too many things to negative keywords as like regular like broad match, like relevancy match, thinking that was the right thing to do. And I started getting matched on very, very few things. And all of my numbers just plummeted. And I contacted the search ads team, and they're very nice. There's actual humans there who will like help you out. And they ran a bunch of numbers, and they recommended that I like remove some of those and just switch to a more relevancy based approach, which I did. And so I would recommend only using negative keywords in exact match mode to avoid that situation. Anyway, I end up coming out for a long time until the last couple of months. I have come out ahead in what I believe a user to my app is worth versus what I'm paying per install from the search ads. And the search ads have made up approximately 10 to 15% of my weekly installs. And so that's not bad.
That's a lot.
Yeah, exactly. And that's 10 to 15% of my installs per week. So, that increases over time. And like those users are, sticking with the app, I think. I don't know. There actually is an API somewhere in iOS. There's an API where you can attribute installations to your app to whether they came from search ads or not, and I think even what keywords they came from, and then you can tell in your app analytics like what those people are worth to you. I have not done that. That seems a little bit too fiddly for me. I don't think I really care that deeply, and it's a little bit creepy, I think. But so I haven't done that. But you can do that, and you can get into deeper measurements. But I have found for the most part this has been worth it for me to do for a while. Unfortunately, over the last couple of months, the podcast-related keywords have really heated up. Thanks, Audible. From like big companies, thanks, Audible, who don't seem to have a limit to their budget. Thanks, Audible. And so I'm losing a lot more bids, and I've had to increase my bids if I want to keep winning them. And I'm now pushing to the point where I'm losing a little bit of money on each install that comes from a search ad. And so far, I've decided, well, I kind of want to wait and see and watch how these numbers go. I kind of don't want to give up that 15%, so maybe I'm okay losing a bit of money on those people because then the other 85% of my users will make up for it. So I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do about this long term yet, but the only reason I've been able to keep costs under control at all is because I'm going in and negative keywording the searches that are providing me with really bad conversion rates and really high cost per install. And because Search Ads Basic does not offer that ability, I do hesitate to recommend it because I don't think you're going to get a lot of control over that kind of thing. And Apple's search relevancy engine is not good enough that I would trust it to do it without any intervention from me. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm intrigued to go to use the basic system, but mostly insofar as it's because it's the only input I give is what the maximum amount I'm willing to pay for installation is. I will just put that number low enough that I feel comfortable with it and understand that like your approach of the highly tuned, like going in there and looking at keyword by keyword, like dialing it in, you are going to end up with a better result for the same like cost per install, but it takes a lot of work and thoughtfulness and so on. Versus the approach of just saying, it's like, I'll put that number low, and if the number is so low that it's not getting high volume, okay, like, that's fine. I didn't have to do much for it. But if I am getting installs from that, great. And so I kind of view it as what you're doing makes perfect sense. And I think it's the ideal way if this is something that you want to spend time on, if you want to sort of have it be a focus. If not, if you're sort of like me and you're just like, this is an interesting kind of more amusement, it's a really convenient way to just kind of like set it at a number that you're comfortable with, and then just see what happens. And that's how I expect to proceed from here.
Well, best of luck. I strongly encourage everyone to use that free credit. Look, you might as well. They're giving you a free credit, so use it and see how it goes. If you want to be strategic about it, wait until after everyone else uses theirs, then use yours.
Sure.
Then the prices will be lower. But anyway, we're out of time this week. I hope this was helpful to you. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we will talk to you next week.
Bye.